Hey everyone, it's Mr. Wobbly94. I hope you're doing well today. I have a book review for you for a Stephen King book. I don't really review a lot of Stephen King books on this channel. I used to read on the original channel I had called Mr. Wobbly94. I used to read a lot of Stephen King, at least 3 to 5 books a year from him, even though it took me very long to read books back then because I didn't realize I don't have to read every word. You know, if there's something that's boring, just kind of skim through it and move along. Anyway, the book I have to review for you here is a pretty big one in its own right. The paperback is like 750 pages. This hardcover is about 600 pages, 610, something like that. Stephen King's Duma Key. Look at this cover, dude. Look at this very summertime type of thing. I love it. It wraps all the way around the book. It's so beautiful, especially all the bizarre stuff back here. I love a lot of this book. I read it for the first time about 2 years ago, and I read it in the paperback form right here. And I love this paperback too. I think this is a little bit easier to carry around and read than the hardcover. That's traditionally the case, but what I'm saying is this is so bulky compared to this that I read that was so thin and tall. It's weird. I'm a massive fan of Duma Key. The first time I read it, again, about 2 years ago, I was obsessed with it. I considered this for the longest time, tied with Bag of Bones as my favorite Stephen King book. I read Bag of Bones again for the first time in like 10 years last year. Well, maybe even longer, closer to 11, 12. I did a review here on the channel for that, by the way. It's a little lengthy. That was at this time that I thought, you know, 25 to 30 minute long reviews were worthwhile, even if they were spoiler free. It probably wasn't. But Duma Key is a fantastic read for the most part. This is a little bit of a slow burner. It takes its time really developing into a really intriguing, crazy, wild story. And I will say, very much like a lot of Stephen King books, it's a little bit bloated. And this time around, reading it with fresh eyes for the first time in 2 years, I can really definitively say that from somebody who would have considered this a perfect book back when I first read it 2 years ago. Now, maybe if this is the first time you've read it, or if you're about to start it, maybe it is a total 5 out of 5 for you as well. It's some of my favorite Stephen King writing of all time, but it has its flaws, enough that I really think there's too much bloat in here. And that's typically the tradition a lot of people hold to nowadays when they say that his books, and a lot of fiction nowadays, influenced by King, in the horror genre especially, is just too bloated. So essentially, what is the story about this book? Duma Key, I always wondered what the title meant. I never read the insides of the book, the blurb or anything. I never read anything about the book before I actually read it a couple of years ago. And I have to tell you, it's a fascinating read. If you happen to be a wannabe writer or some kind of artist or any kind of artist of anything, a musician, you should read this book. It's very inspirational to folks like myself. I want to be a writer, by the way. I don't know if many people know about that. I've been trying to do that for like 10 years, and I kind of start, and then I stop, and I start, and I stop. This book kind of delves with that a little bit. Essentially, there's a fellow named Edgar Freemantle, who I guess may or may not be a relative of Miss Freemantle from The Stand, Abigail Freemantle, who I love deeply. He doesn't reference her, but the last name being the same is kind of interesting. He is in charge of a construction site, and this book is written in first person, by the way, and he gets in a terrible accident. He gets some brain damage. He has a very bad, I think he cracked his hip or something. It was really rough. It sounded like a lot of pain, but he also lost his arm. So he's a one-armed man now. He has brain damage. He has a hard time really kind of organizing his thoughts and his vocabulary. When he tries to say things like chair, he can't memorize the word chair in his brain enough to say it to somebody. So if he's talking to his ex-wife, Pam, when she's still with him, back in the flashback portion at the beginning of the book, he might say, like, bring the thing over, bring it, darn it, bring that thing. He'll say stuff like that, you know? And just in case that worries you, the entire book is not like that. It's just certain phrases that Edgar struggles trying to remember. I will tell you this, Edgar Freemantle is one of the best characters Stephen King's ever written, and yet he might not be the best character in the book. There are other side characters in here that I think are even better that I'll get to in a little bit, but man, the book is such a character-motivated thing, and being in the first person of Edgar is fascinating. It's refreshing. I love this character. He's such a great guy. I just love him, and I hate the trials he has to go through. He struggles so much. Even to be a really rich guy, he struggles so much. He has to pretty much kind of back off from his company with the construction stuff. He essentially starts getting into sketches and whatever after he gets through the physical therapy and everything else. His wife divorces him. He happens to have 2 daughters who are named, I think it's Isle, I-S-L-E, I think is how you say her name. The other one is named Melinda, and when he leaves, those 2 girls, by the way, are pretty much adults, so they go off on their own worlds, like for college and stuff. When Pam, his wife, divorces him, he essentially just moves out to Florida, buys this, or rents this beautiful house. It's a big old pink house, by the way, in Florida. He calls it Big Pink. And one of my favorite details in any Stephen King book, or any book for that matter ever, is at nighttime when the shore comes in, he hears the seashells rubbing against the bottom of the house. There's something so bizarre and poetic about that, the way King writes it in this book. He says it numerous times, but it's just beautiful. I love how he writes about that. Stephen King's way with words. If you like Bag of Bones a lot, I think you'll love this as well. I constantly used to say that about this book when I would talk about it and Bag of Bones. If you liked one, or if you love one, you'll love the other. I really do believe that. Even though now in hindsight, I think this is a lesser book than Bag of Bones because of some of the flaws that it has. It's so close to being a masterpiece. Last year, or even 3 months ago, before my Tennessee vacation, and I started rereading this, I probably would have told you it's a masterpiece. And again, I read some in Tennessee and when I was on vacation, and the book is so heavy, I couldn't get comfortable, so I just shut it and started reading Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark 1 and 2, which I just did reviews on, by the way, in case you want to see that. And Duma Key is mainly about Edgar getting into art and sketches during his physical therapy session, and then immediately when he lives in Big Pink over in Florida, how did that just kind of blossoms into painting. He used to sketch a whole lot, but now he's really into painting, and he's trying to do that one-armed on top of that. He's getting used to that. I know it sounds like a boring plot, but I promise you it was fascinating. It's such a weird story, how it unravels. The whole overall book is very bizarre, very weird. When people talk about, you know, the Dark Tower tie-in type of books, I don't know how much this one ties to that. I've only read a few of those books. But it feels like what Insomnia tried to be, you know? Insomnia is just incredibly awful and boring. I hate it. I think it's one of the worst Stephen King books of all time. It's so bloated. It should have been like a short story or novella. It would have been way better at that point. But this book actually seems like what King wanted to do with Insomnia. I don't know which one came first. I think Insomnia did, but this is like a masterclass of first-person writing, in my opinion. So, getting on to some of the side characters, when he's down in Florida, or over in Florida, wherever he's from, and he's going over to Florida, while he's there, he meets some people who happen to be the landowner and her health assistant. The landowner's name Elizabeth Eastlake. She's a very elderly woman. She seems kind of intimidating at first, but then she seems kind of nice. She apparently is some kind of Alzheimer's patient of some sort. She has some other health issues on the side as well. And her caretaker is named Wireman, who is a fellow that has some very interesting jokes and whatever. I believe he's a Latino man, but at one point in the book it said that he was married to a Latino woman, which is important to the story. I'm not just bringing that up, it's part of the story. And he uses a lot of like Spanish phrases. He talks in Spanish quite a bit. And I love Wireman. I love the guy. He might very well be the best character in the book. He is so fun. He's so funny. I just love this guy. If you haven't read this book, you're missing out on Mr. Wireman and how he's one of the funniest people Stephen King has ever written, and his relationship with our main character Edgar and how they banter and bicker as they become more and more of best friends throughout the book. This whole 600-page run in hardcover, 700 in paperback, like I said, is just fantastic. It is such a fantastic friendship blossoming thing, even though I will argue with a lot of people and say this book is kind of plotless most of the time. It's kind of a slice of life story that really eventually evolves more and more, where you realize a lot of the things you read throughout this book, including the how to draw section, or how to draw a picture, whatever those sections are called throughout the book. They interrupt chapters and that kind of thing. You kind of find out why certain things you read in previous parts of the book, when you're about 500 pages in, why some of those things now make sense. And one of the big things about this, a lot of people, and I kind of agree with them, think this would have been better if it had not been a supernatural-laced book. However, I find that it would be personally, with the kind of tale that it becomes by the finale, I think it kind of has to be supernatural to be as fun and engaging and creepy as this book gets. It's not a super scary book, but it is one of those ones like Bag of Bones that really get to me. I'm also the guy who doesn't think The Shining is scary, as much as everybody else considers that to be the best Stephen King book of all time. I don't know if they're saying it's the scariest. I've heard people say that, but I don't know how many people actually believe that. For me, I think this and Bag of Bones are some of the scariest things he's ever written. And the writing style, again, just everybody. They all have distinct voices, all of these characters, especially Wireman and Edgar, both of them. But the detailing of things, I love it. Again, the book might be bloated, but Stephen King always takes that bloat and does something special with it. If you hate it, that's one thing, but you can have a good time while reading this. But again, understand you're going into like a character study type of thing, and the kind of tragedies that Edgar Fremantle deals with in the beginning of the book, and then what he deals with as he starts to get into the artwork stuff, and kind of the weird supernatural abilities he may or may not have that are developing alongside his new artistic skills, whatever you want to call that. It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. But again, the book is kind of plotless, and I realized that this time around as I read it, as much of a fanboy as I am of this book, it's kind of flawed in that regard. If you had taken out all of that, if you had taken out the first person stuff, this book would have been like a 300-page book, and rightfully so. It shouldn't have been that long to begin with. It takes place over months and months, but I rooted for Edgar from beginning to end both times that I read this book, and you would assume him being your hero character, you're kind of supposed to. But I just love the guy. I could give the guy a hug for all the shit he goes through in this book. It's kind of depressing, honestly. But overall, this book, man, it is just like nothing you've ever read. I promise you it's like nothing I've ever read out of all the books I've read over the years, especially in the horror genre. Even though this is a little less horror, it's kind of there sometimes, a little bit different, a little bit of a slice of life horror. If you can do that, that's kind of what this comes across to me. I love the artsy-fartsy stuff. If you're a big writer, again, painter, anything like that, I think you'll like this a lot. I think it'll really mean a lot to you and just life in general. If you're having a hard time in your life, read this. It'll make you feel better. I really do believe that. Duma Key is a phenomenal book. It has a lot of problems. Like I said, not tons, but the pacing and stuff, that can be a major problem for a lot of readers, I think. Not that I'm taking them into account, but I'm just saying it's flawed, but it's a fantastic read. I think the finale is very strong, maybe a little quick, but it's mostly very, very powerful, very sad, very depressing. It's amazing how good this book is and how it flies by. And one of my favorite characters also in here, by the way, I forgot to mention this, is Isle, the daughter, the one that spells I-S-L-E. Great character. She comes to visit Edgar sometimes, and she's just wonderful. I love the people in this book. I pretty much like every character in the entire book. I think all of them serve a purpose in a great way, including down to the freaking doctor that Edgar went through physical therapy with. It's so thorough. It might be too thorough for some people, but man, it's good. It's such a good read. Stephen King's Duma Key. I love it a lot. It's not perfect like I want it to be, but man, it's a very good one if you like this kind of book. Again, if you love Bag of Bones, check it out. I think you'll love this as well, and vice versa. If you just read this, you're looking for reviews on it, and you want to know what your next book should be, Bag of Bones, another fantastic summertime read like this. It's even better than this. I think it's a perfect version of this kind of story, having to deal with loss, with grief, and some other issues in that particular book and the kind of themes that are there. Duma Key, if I had to rate this book on a 5-star basis, what would I give it? I would probably give it a 4 out of 5 stars. It's fantastic. It's really great. Last year, I would have given this a 5 out of 5 because I loved it so much. And maybe if you read it for the first time on your first chance of checking it out, again, you might rate it higher. But on a reread, this one kind of faded out for me a little bit, as I've told you numerous times. But man, it's a good one. I really recommend it if you haven't read it before. Very much an underrated Stephen King book, I will say that much. As much as I like things like Cujo, I like Pet Sematary, I like those things, they don't even come close to this or Bag of Bones for me. Honestly, I mean that. Anyway, what are your thoughts on Duma Key? Have you read this book? What did you think about it? Put your thoughts and comments down below. I would love to hear what you guys have to say. I know we're technically in fall, and it's the end of the summer, but I read this during the summer. It's a great book, again, for that time of the year. Really save it up for that time of the year when you go on vacation. It's a really good one to enjoy. I also like the new re-release cover, by the way. The one with it's like a white background, the lake and all that. You see like the stones and Edgar's walking up them with a missing arm. Very cool cover. Anyway, what are your thoughts on this book? Put them down below. Again, thank you for watching, guys. God bless you all, and goodbye.